Welcome to Code and Concrete, the leading podcast for prop tech, conversations about the built environment, and other exciting innovations. If you learn something new, please consider following and leaving a positive review. Enjoy. Hi folks, welcome back to Code and Concrete. Joining me today, I have George Siegal. George specializes in creating impactful documentaries that shed light on hidden issues affecting homeowners and renters. His work focuses on uncovering the unseen risks that threaten people's safety and property, empowering them with knowledge to make informed decisions before those problems escalate. George, thank you for coming on Code and Concrete.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. I got the opportunity to watch the documentary that you produced, Built to Last. Very interesting. I mean, I have a lot of questions. We're going to get into that, like why people keep moving back to Florida given all of the climate risk and what people should know about insurance. And that's baked right into the questions. Like, I think that there's so much that people don't know about homeownership, which is painted as the American dream, and all the strings attached to that. But before we dive in, let's get to know you. George, how did you get here? Go back to graduating high school. How did your career path start?
Well, I graduated high school in Southern California, Pacific Palisades, by the way, which burned down last year. So that's just a tragic story. Then I got into the TV news business, and I worked in markets around the country from Bakersfield, California, to Seattle, to San Francisco, to Detroit, to San Antonio. And so I've lived in a number of different places, and I've covered a lot of stories about disasters and about people losing everything. So when I got out of the news business, I said, let me try to do some things that might be a wake-up call for people so we can show them that just going by your heart and your emotions when you're buying a property isn't really a smart decision if you're looking at it as an investment with all your money. And so I've made two films in that arena now. One was called The Last House Standing, which was after Hurricane Michael. We went up to Mexico Beach and talked about the one house left on the beach. And then we went to other parts of the country and talked about disasters. And then my current film, which is on public television stations around the country, it's called Built to Last, Buyer Beware. And it's really to shake people. It's a wake-up call. It's like, come on, we're making bad decisions. Then we're relying on insurance to bail us out. Our lives could be ruined. Let's be smarter than that. And that's what I'm trying to do is to educate people. And one of the things you're kind enough to let me do, and you're going to put it in the show notes, is I've created a document that's questions you absolutely need to ask your builder or the person you're buying a house from. And there's some pretty basic questions that if they can't answer, it could be saving you from making a bad decision. And we're also going to tell people how they can rent the film in the show notes as well. So I appreciate you giving me that opportunity.
Absolutely. I assume some of those checkboxes are risks that people are typically not aware of. And so we're presenting them an opportunity. Here's something you should ask about. Can we give a little sneak peek? What are some of the blind spots or risks that homeowners are typically not considering when they're picking out a place to live?
Well, one of actually, there's two that come to mind really quickly because I've kind of bought into both of those or been a victim of both of those. And that is not truly understanding the risks in the area where you're moving. So people say you're moving to Florida, but there are places in Florida that are safer than other places that could be more resilient and give you a better chance of survival if a major hurricane should strike you. We did not make that choice. The other one is asking the person you're buying that home from, what safety features did they build into it that they're telling us makes the house safe? And it's very interesting to see if they'll even give an effort to explain that and tell you why that house could survive if your goal is to survive a Category 5 hurricane. Did they build it in any way that that's even possible? Or did they build it to withstand a Category 2 hurricane? You know, the codes, building codes are one of those things I know we're going to talk about, but they're different in different communities. And so there's a base standard, but then there's people that go above and beyond. And it's like, what standard do you want to live to? How important is it to you to live in a house that can survive a disaster? And I think that's the number one question people should answer before they buy a property is, what is my risk tolerance? What can I afford to lose here? And then make a choice based off of that, not off of, does it have a pool? Is it near a nice school? Will my kids have a park to play in? Those are all very important things. Let's not deny that. But those aren't the things that are going to cost you to lose everything.
So building on that, what do you think are some of the risks that people are generally underestimating? It sounds that or sounds like weather is the predominant risk, but then perhaps another risk would be non-compliance of the property itself or not exceeding expectations. How would we start to categorize these risks that people are facing
Well,
when
I think the
purchasing a
top
house?
one, you're saying weather obviously is an easy one to see. Okay, we can see that
Hmm.
happen on a regular basis. But what about wildfires? What about earthquakes? What about sinkholes? What about flash flooding? What about flooding in general? There's a lot of things that a lot of that information is available for people to find out, and it's not necessarily handed to us when we're buying a property. But they're things that you could dig a little bit and get that information. Sinkholes are not covered under any insurance policy, so you never want to be near those. Wildfires, wow, the neighborhood I grew up in burned to the ground this
Hmm.
past year. And we never would have thought that that could have happened on such a wide scope. So who would have had that knowledge? How many people actually had a house that was resilient to fire and would have given them a chance to survive? I think we saw very few did. And sometimes the disaster is so bad, maybe nothing would help, in which case you want to make sure you have really good insurance and a great evacuation plan. Sometimes running is your best chance in the end, but how successfully can you do that and still have something to come back to?
So maybe looking at this from the human element, why are people systematically ignoring the risks that are present? Is it simply a lack of information, or do people believe that they're going to be immune to the risks? Why is this an issue?
Well, I don't want to say, the blunt thing would be say we're all stupid. And that would put myself in that category because I've made bad decisions so many times. I think it's a certain human nature where we just don't think it's going to happen to us.
Hmm.
We go, wow, I'm going to live down there by the beach because I don't think it's going to happen. The odds of a Category 5 hurricane wiping that out are very slim, and I'm not really worried about it. Well, here's where that comes back to really get you. The neighborhood that I live in Florida, there's a lot of older one-story houses, and everybody thought, it's never going to happen. Tampa hasn't had a bullseye hurricane in years. We got hit by two back-to-back, two hurricane seasons ago. All the one-story houses in my neighborhood pretty much flooded. So now there's a big turnover in the neighborhood as they're being torn down and rebuilt. Or some people are just saying, you know what? I don't think it's going to happen again. I'm just going to fix my house and move back in. And they're taking a huge risk. They got nailed once. Now they're fixing it, and they're going to risk that it doesn't happen again. And I think that's a very dangerous attitude. I think if we look at statistics and we look at possibilities of things happening, what's your risk? In the film, we use the analogy of you're walking into a casino with everything you have, and you're sliding it in on a roulette table for one spin of the wheel. And you're going, that's what I'm risking everything. Spin the wheel. And then as you're watching that wheel spin, you're going, wait a second. There's a lot of things that can go wrong here. And there's only one little tab on the wheel that says happily ever after. So all the hazards that can happen to you are out there, and you're just betting that it's not going to happen to you. And what I try to tell people is, if you just make some smarter choices, you can eliminate a lot of those. You can't be 100% safe anywhere. You could be the best driver in the world, and a drunk driver barrels through a light and hits and kills you. You can't control everything. But there are a lot of things we can control. And by ignoring those, a lot of people get wiped out every year.
I actually want to jump ahead one question because this is really important about why people are living in these places. It's probably not entirely naivete. There's this assumption that the institutions are looking out for us. And so, in the odd chance that the risk does actually come into fruition, there's going to be coverage, there's going to be payouts. But this, and we're seeing this not just in real estate, but also healthcare as well, where the likelihood that you could be denied for something because you didn't meet the requirements of the fine print, those numbers are not only high already, but they're increasing. There was a large scandal recently that one of the healthcare companies was going to start using artificial intelligence to automatically decline claims, and this was going to skyrocket. Now you apply the same logic to real estate because insurance companies, like any company, are looking to make a profit, and they don't show up for people when it matters. When it matters the most. So can we touch on this just a little bit, like why homeowners cannot rely on their insurance to bail them out of these catastrophes.
What you're talking about insurance is so true. And it actually happened to me years ago. There was an insurance company, they're still around, I think, called Travelers. And they went through this period. They got sued for it and lost a lot of money. They denied every claim. And they knew that a percentage of people would not reapply that claim and they would never have to pay them. They just get frustrated and they go away. Well, in the homeowner sphere, that happens all the time. You have a damage from a storm, you file your claim, they send out an adjuster, they go over everything, you think you're going to get paid. And then right about that time, they switch adjusters and they kick it down the road a little further. And it's a very tedious process in a lot of instances to get paid. Now, that doesn't happen for everybody. We interviewed some people in the film that had good experiences with insurance and it was just fine. And that's great when that happens. But it's the stories that go south that are heartbreaking when somebody has to end up giving up everything because they've lost all their money. For years, they're paying a mortgage for a house they can't live in. All their possessions are damaged. They lost their job because the hotel they were working at was destroyed in the hurricane. And things really go south. Insurance is not an automatic Band-Aid for fixing your problems. In fact, it's a risk. And their goal in a lot of instances, I believe, historically, we see this in the news all the time, is not to pay you or to find a reason to pay you as little as possible.
Mm-hmm.
In Florida, if you have to sue your insurance company and you win, you can't even get attorney's fees anymore. You have to pay for the lawyer yourself. And that can be very debilitating for people because you don't have enough money after you do that to fix your house. So insurance is it's not a slam dunk. And if you live in an area where there's flooding or wind, those are two separate insurance policies. You better believe they want the other guy to pay it. So wind thinks it's water, water thinks it's wind, and they'll fight for years. And who loses? We do. So it's a false promise of security that doesn't always exist. And it's very expensive as well. If you buy a house without knowing in advance what your insurance is going to cost, you're taking an incredible risk.
Right. Well, let's talk about code and compliance, which a lot of people think that code and concrete is just about software code or programming, but it's actually codifications as well. So a lot of homeowners are looking at a property and maybe it's code compliant and that meets their expectations, but really that's not good enough. So how do we compare code compliant to what you describe as resilient?
Well, that's one of the questions that I want you to ask them is what features they put in to survive the disasters that are likely to happen there. Because saying I'm code compliant, if a builder looks at you and says, yep, this house is built to code, that means they took the minimum they had to do and they built to that standard. Mm-hmm. So the code is, this is the minimum standard you have. Now that's based on older data. They revise them from time to time, but it's a very tedious process to change building codes. It's a very slow push for that to happen. So you're taking a house and you're seeing that they did not go above and beyond to build it. I like builders that exceed the code. So resilient building is taking more into account the hazards of today and looking ahead to what is likely to happen. So in my neighborhood, for example, they just raised the flood level, I think, to 10.5 feet above sea level for building. But I would want to build a house at 12 or 13 feet. In fact, we've had experts say in our film that if we got a direct hit here where I live, we would have 15 feet of water everywhere. So what does it cost to build that way? That creates an argument of, I don't want to spend the money to do that. But you're not really thinking straight if you do that, because you're saying, I'm putting everything into this. This is all my money. I'm investing in this house, but I'm not going to do everything to protect that investment. So what I would like is resilience is more of a thought of what's going to make that house last. Compliant just means, yep, it's a low bar and I got it. Come on, move in.
It seems like a large accountability issue because the real estate developers can build these assets that are quote unquote compliant, but they're not going above and beyond because they're looking to make as much money as possible on the sale and then shift responsibility and ultimately accountability for catastrophe onto the next owner. Build, get out of it as quickly as possible. So how do you think that we could start to shift that market dynamic? First thing that comes to my mind is that the market or buyers have to demand more from their properties and simply buy the good properties. Now, of course, that's going to be at a slight premium, but I would think that's offset by lower insurance premiums. And then if something does happen, you are not paying for the entire house being destroyed outright. So it seems worth it.
Well, I would say to them, are you a builder or a rebuilder? Are you building this to last? That's why I like the title, Built to Last, because that should be the goal. And a lot of builders build spec houses to the minimum code, and then we end up buying them. So there's nothing I love more than walking around my neighborhood and seeing a house that we know is in a bad spot because it's flooded before they tore it down. The builder threw up a house that is just to code. They didn't do concrete on both floors. They did wood on the second floor. So they didn't go above and beyond. And the house sits for months and months and months. And I love watching them lose their tail on that because they're trying to think we're stupid, and hopefully people aren't. And somebody will come along and buy it. Somebody will have to move here on a relocation, and the house looks good from the street. And then the first time it rains, their garage is going to flood. And the next time it rains, maybe some of the stucco that they put on the second floor over the wood is going to get water in it, and they're going to get mold and termites and all kinds of problems because they didn't build it the right way. And I think that that's the only thing we can really control as consumers. We can stop buying crap. If we keep buying it, it keeps circulating around. The builder walks away. They go on to their next project.
Right.
And in Florida, they did another crummy thing. You used to be able to sue your builder for material defects up to 10 years after buying your house. They cut that to 7 years. Now, ask anybody that's ever bought a house, when does most of the stuff in your house start falling apart? 7 years. Bingo. They have a huge lobby, and the builder's lobby dictates the direction that certain things go, and they get away with it. Now, this is not to say that they're all bad. I have friends here in Tampa that are builders, and they're code exceeders. They brag about how they build above code. Their goal is to build a house that's going to last. And that's the attitude I'd love to see from all of them. And the only way that I think that's going to happen is because we change it. I don't think it's possible to change the building code everywhere. If they did that in my state, everybody would build to the standard of Southeast Florida, down in Miami, Broward County, that area, because there you have to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. Up where I live, it's a Category 2 to 3. So it's not as high a standard. You can use a lot more wood. It's a little more lax, and that's dangerous.
Well, aside from weather, what do you think are some other long-term, maybe more subliminal risks that homeowners are posed with?
Other than weather, would you put fire in the category of weather? Would you put earthquakes in the category of weather? There's fault lines in states we don't even think of as earthquake states, like South Carolina. When you hear of earthquakes, when you look on a earthquake map, that's one of the most active fault zones that there is. But I don't think they build to withstand those. So most of Los Angeles isn't code compliant for earthquakes. So there's a lot of different hazards. Sea level rise is real. Water levels are rising. There's a place we went to in our film called Cedar Key, Florida, where the water has risen every year. In Miami, they have flooding on sunny days sometimes just from a high tide. So as we get closer to the water, because that's what people want, we're encroaching, make that word up. We're putting ourselves in places that maybe weren't meant to be built on. And as a result, nature wants that back. And they always get it. If they want it back, you look at neighborhoods that are built on the water or built, in a floodplain or built along a bank of a river. Look at that tragedy in Texas last year in Kerrville, where that camp was flooded. On a map, it clearly showed that it could flood, but it hadn't happened for years. So parents were just sending their kids there to camp without understanding the risk. And the camp sure didn't express any risk about it. They put the youngest kids closest to the water. So it really has to start, like I say, with us bottom feeder people, all of us. Whenever you're going to do something, take a few extra minutes and really give it a check over and say, okay, I'm sending my kids there. Is that in a flood zone? What is the risk? I'm thinking of moving there. What's the highest elevation areas there? What are neighborhoods that are known for being above and beyond the code, where I have a safer chance of protecting my investment? And maybe it means living 20, 30 minutes inland, and you take trips to the beach as opposed to risking all you have and living at the beach. So it depends on what your risk tolerance is. And as one gentleman said in our film, he said, I wouldn't live near the water. If you're worried about that risk, that's not where you should be. That's not as fun. That's not a sexy, fun thing to say. But if you want to save everything you have and retire someday and live happily ever after, that's your best road to that, as opposed to taking that huge gamble.
I think most Americans are in suburbs or inland where hazards are probably not an immediate threat. Are there other forms of risk, maybe just low quality materials and natural degradation that homeowners need to be considering? I mean, they do call American houses practically cardboard boxes or McMansions. So it's implied that a lot of the stock is low quality. What do you think about
That's
that?
probably safe to say. And you know what? If you can Google, and I don't want to like name builders. I know about 3 or 4 of them that I wouldn't go near if they were giving me a house, and see the problems that people have had in those subdivisions.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, as you talk about, it's an inland subdivision where you don't think about flooding, but it's near a creek or there's a dam upstream from that house that could break and flood the entire neighborhood. Or it was an area that was a huge green space that they put all these houses. Where's all that water going now? What plan did they use in designing it so all that water would run off and not end up flooding the houses in the neighborhood? So just because you live 20 miles inland isn't a pass for problems. And if you don't have flood insurance in those neighborhoods because you don't think you're near water, you won't get any money. Insurance isn't paying you for flooding. Your regular policy will not pay for water flowing into your house. So my feeling too is, for everybody that wants to be safe, everybody should have flood insurance. It's a lot cheaper when you're not in a flood zone. But anyhow, if it rains, the former FEMA director, Brock Long, said to me, if it rains where you live, your house can flood. Period.
Interesting. Well, sounds like people have to take matters into their own hands, which is something that you say often, that people have to look out for themselves because nobody else will, especially in the system. I mean, builders, insurers, regulators, they really have the incentives here. So how do you see the start and end to personal responsibility? Like
I
us
think it
as
all
homeowners.
falls on us. I think it's, like I say, it's very hard to change building codes. In Mexico Beach, Florida, that got hit by a Category 5 hurricane, they made the building code tougher right after the hurricane, but people complained so much. It's actually weaker now than it was before the hurricane hit.
Who complained?
So the residents, they said that I don't want to pay all this money. It's too expensive to rebuild my house. Why do I have to pay all this? It's not going to happen again. And they're building a lot of houses in Mexico Beach out of wood, and they're not building them at a code that will survive a similar thing happening to them. So I think it's up to us to assume that we have to make smarter decisions, smarter informed decisions, because not everybody is going to explain it to you. How many people have read their insurance policy? Ask your insurance agent to explain that policy to you. Understand exactly what your coverage is. If you try to read it yourself, it's a 56-page document that has so much mumbo jumbo in it, you'll fall asleep after page 4, and you'll miss the good stuff that could tell you all the things they're not going to pay you for. So, I don't want to have people think everybody around them is bad. And a lot of times that's what that message sounds like. It's like you can't trust anybody. There's a lot of great people out there. But think about the daunting task of building a house. That builder has to now have subs that do every piece of that house. So that means the guy that designed the air conditioning had to do their job. The plumber had to do his job. The electrician had to do their job. The landscaper, the pool guy, the roofer. All those people you're assuming were on their A game when they went in there and built that house. Welcome to the real world. Everybody has problems. And even the best builders have problems. The question is, to me, what separates the good from the bad is the one that'll answer the phone, address the problem, and fix it. And so you need to do investigating. If you're ever going to buy a house, go walk around the neighborhood. If you're on a relocation trip and you have 2 days to buy a house, that's very risky. Spend a lot of time online learning about that neighborhood. And then try, if you can, to go on a weekend and talk to other people in the neighborhood. If you're talking to a builder or your house was built by a certain builder, don't go by their list of referrals of the friends and family that love them. Find the people that sued them. Find the people that have their house that have had a nightmare experience. And maybe that'll steer you in a different direction. Or maybe you'll find out they're great. I bought a house in San Antonio years ago, and we were the second owner of that house. And there was a problem with the roof. And I called the builder. And he goes, well, the house isn't under warranty anymore. but that shouldn't happen. And he came out and fixed it and didn't charge us
Wow.
because he cared about what he was doing. He had pride. The next guy I bought from, he bitched every time there was a problem because he did a crummy job building it, and it was a problem getting stuff fixed. So it's all a matter of what the reputation is and how much they stand behind what they do. And anything, that's any product we buy. Read Amazon reviews. Some companies don't answer anything. Some companies try to bribe you to give them a good review. And then read the 1 and 2 star reviews. And does the manufacturer of that product or seller respond to those complaints and say, wow, I'm sorry, my product shouldn't have broken 2 weeks in. Let me fix that for you, or let me replace it. You can learn a lot, but most people, we don't want to do that. We care about the icing on the cake and not the ingredients. So we don't want to do the hard work. It's not fun. And I'm guilty of that myself. So I'm not scolding people for stuff I haven't made mistakes at myself. But if the next time I move, I'm not making the same mistakes. I try to get a little smarter each time. And, that's the goal, is to make decisions that are smarter decisions. Because once you become a victim, all bets are off in your life in terms of what could happen and what the road to recovery is. And some people never recover.
Mm-hmm. Great points. Great points. How do you see renting versus homeownership? How does the risk and responsibility shift there?
Every renter should understand when they rent a property that the owner of that building has insured their building. They have not insured anything of yours. So everything you have in your apartment, you need to have insurance for, because they're not going to cover it. If that building burns down, if that building blows down, they're not covering it. You should also know how well it was built. I had a building here in Tampa that my daughter moved into, and the person giving us the tour said this building is all concrete, because I asked them, and they go, this could withstand a major hurricane. It's totally safe. So I called my film partner, when the last hurricane, I think it was Milton, was hitting. And I said, will my daughter be safe in her apartment? And he goes, that apartment's not concrete. It's all made of wood. And he sent me a time-lapse picture of how they built it. The garage and the stairwells were concrete, but the whole building is made out of wood. It would not have withstood a Category 5 hurricane. And so you need to know how your building is built. If it's all wood, what did they do for fire? And how quickly would that place burn down if the couple on the 3rd floor left their eggs on and the building started on fire? How would that building hold up? And we're seeing so many apartments, especially I think if they're 5 stories or less, that are built all wood. Are you willing to take that risk? If you're going to do that, make sure you have insurance, and then make sure that you evacuate when there's a storm and go someplace that you know is going to be safe, because your structure might not be. So you still have to look into things. And a lot of people just assume that if they're being rented an apartment, and we were guilty of that too, we believed the salesman and we made a bad choice.
Now, when you say that these buildings are made of wood, most properties in the U.S. are made of wood. This is not referring to mass timber, though. This is just your typical plywood going into a building. Is that right? And how do you see different construction methods like concrete versus wood versus mass timber playing a role in resilience?
Well, I think it plays a huge role. And sure, most apartments might be made out of wood. So then you want to know what level they thought of they were building that to withstand the hazards that could happen. So when we were in Moore, Oklahoma, they build a lot of apartment complexes there. They're all wood, but they have storm cellars. So they have mass evacuation places where everybody in the building could go if there's a tornado. Here in Florida, the Tampa Housing Authority, which helps lower income families, they build apartment complexes around the city. They only build them out of concrete. And the president of the Housing Authority said he's not going to victimize people that are already having some struggles or disadvantaged by putting them in an unsafe situation. Well, if he can do that, why isn't every builder doing that in Florida? Because it's cheaper to do it the other way. Now, if you live in Massachusetts, if you live in Maryland, other places where you might live, you want to know that that building is built to withstand whatever hazards might happen there. But where did that apartment get placed? What are the odds that it could flood? And the first floor is now wiped out, so you can't even have access to your apartment. So you still have to do your due diligence. Not everything's going to be made out of concrete, But ideally, concrete or ICFs, things that are made out of products that are designed to withstand mold and termites and all those things, I think is the safest. It might not be practical to do it in certain parts of the country, but that's a decision that you have to make based on the area that you are. You have to know there's so many different places. What is the standard here, and how was that built to survive whatever hazards could happen here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was just thinking, for some of these multifamily units or commercial properties, the risk is probably not external, but internal, because you're dealing with a lot of different units and a lot of different people. So perhaps a good item on the checklist, maybe it's there, is in the event of some sort of electrical fire that starts, how easily will that spread throughout the building? I know that there's fire doors that can be implemented, or some materials have to withstand a certain amount of heat. So there's all different types of things that should be considered and factored into what's a reliable place, a safe place to live and park money, fundamentally. Because going back to your roulette analogy, it's not just where you're living, but you're putting a lot of money on the house, no pun intended. Actually, all the pun intended in this case. But certainly, like condominiums, where you are sharing a wall, perhaps, how easily could your neighbor's stupidity become your problem? It's not just about the snowfall or the earthquake. Maybe it is someone leaving the eggs on the stove for too long. It's a good consideration.
Absolutely. And that can happen anywhere, in an apartment or a condominium. And in a condominium, the biggest thing I think you have to worry about, in addition to the quality of how it was built, is what are the reserves? How have they maintained that? Because they do what's called assessments after a storm, where in our film, we show this condominium complex down near Sanibel Island in Fort Myers Beach, where the residents have been assessed anywhere from $75,000 to $125,000 from a 2022 hurricane, and a lot of them still have not moved back in since that time. Mm-hmm. So your fate is kind of out of your hands in a condominium. What if you live on the 15th floor and the elevator's out?
Right.
You think you're going to be living there very long and being able to go in and out of your place with those kind of conditions. So there's a lot of risks. Surfside, we saw the collapse of that apartment complex where it just wasn't maintained right, and the whole building collapsed. So there's a false sense of security in those things, because when you get the tour, they show you the lounge, the gym, the pool. They don't walk you around showing fire doors usually. They're not talking about safety features. Right. They're talking about the cool stuff that shows, and they take you to a model apartment that looks great because the furniture's undersized, so it looks like you have space, and all your stuff's not in there overflowing in the place. And they don't talk about a lot of the things that we should be asking them about. I would love to go back to the apartment that I went with my daughter and just say, okay, why'd you guys lie to us? I mean, I posted a review online, and I think it's had 100,000 views, because I don't like being misled by anybody. I think our truth is what we have. That's what we walk around with. And if people can't believe you, you have nothing. Mm-hmm. But we believe people. We believe salesmen. We believe managers when they're giving us a tour. We believe realtors when they're taking us someplace. And the thing is, I say, don't put your blame on other people. I could have found out that information by just looking for the video that my partner found. So ultimately, it's my fault. I didn't do my work, and we could have ended up paying for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right that there's a false sense of security in these more institutional assets, especially. It could be a big developer or a large multifamily complex, or even other types of properties. There's 3 tragedies that come to mind. The Grenfell Tower fire in the UK, which they had none of the necessary data or information about that property in order to route first responders to I believe it was the gas line to shut that off. So, I mean, where's the governance? Where's the management there? You mentioned Surfside. The second was the recent apartment complexes in Hong Kong that caught fire. I believe there were 8 buildings, and these are tall buildings, at least 30 stories each, thousands of people living there. And it was the contractors on site using non-compliant tarp, which caught fire and then spread throughout all these buildings. And when you mentioned elevators, I was just thinking about how people I mean, going down 30 flights of stairs is challenging, especially when you have elderly or children. And the elevators were certainly not accessible because that's where a lot of the heat was centralizing, accumulating, and then it was blowing out the top of the building. It was acting, it looked like a volcano, to paint a picture in the minds of the people. And then the third example, I believe this was Switzerland, just recently, the lodge that caught fire. Now, it was a club, but you have to think about who is going to be bringing out the sparklers and how close are they going to hold that to exposed insulation on the roof. So the opportunity for tragedy is, and I don't know if that's the best word, the chance of misfortune is potentially anywhere. And just because you're in an environment where there's a lot of people or it's been standing or it's managed by another company does not necessarily mean you can depend on it. It almost seems like, not to instill a sense of fear in people, but you got to keep your head on a swivel. You got to keep in mind the exit routes and just be able to navigate these places, because if something does happen and there's a crowd of people cramming to the door and you're last in line, that's an issue right there. There's just so many things that I guess people need to be a little bit more attuned to. I don't know if I have my wording right that time, but it's a great conversation. And we've been able to talk to other people who are building different safety and exits or evacuation solutions. So there's definitely some minds in the space, and we can take all the responsibility, but we still have to factor in the unpredictability of other people.
Yeah, and you can control it in your space. But I when I was doing my podcast, I had a guy on that made a special fire ladder that was on the side of your house, and it was one strong big ladder that flipped sideways or went flat against the house. So if you had to get out from the second floor, you weren't throwing a ladder out the window.
Right.
That was one of those ladders that you've never used before. I don't know anybody that's ever taken their fire ladder that they throw out that unravels as they throw it out the window and actually climbed out on it. Because I've heard it's very difficult to do, especially when you're panicking trying to leave in a fire. So even if it's your own property, you can control that. You can practice on the devices that you purchase to make it safe. Check your fire extinguishers. Make sure they have enough juice in them that'll actually put a fire out. But when you're going to a club or you're in a high rise, you got to put a little more thought into that. I'm always looking for how would I get out of here if I had to run out of here. And I'm not a paranoid person, but I am curious what I would do. I'm just casually looking around going, what would I do?
Right.
I just think we have to wake up a lot of times. Everybody's so glued to their phone that sometimes you don't even, I don't even know what my kids look like. I could tell you what the top of their head looked like. So if I ever had to describe them to somebody, it would be, red hair, and a cowlick, because they're always looking down. And the idea is look up, look around, see what's around you. You can eliminate a lot of things by being more observant yourself.
Great advice. Well, as we wrap up here, George, I always like to give a call to action. I think there's a couple items that you would like to put in the hands of people. What are those?
We have some lovely parting gifts for you. First of all, you can rent the film, the long form of my film. That the shorter version is on PBS. The Florida Association of Public Insurance Adjusters are our presenting sponsor, and so you can watch that film online. You can rent it. And then the PDF I'd like you to download is questions you absolutely need to ask your builder or the seller of the house you're buying. And if they can't answer them, buy something else.
Perfect. Well, George, thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom and some of the wisdom that we can grab from people who have actually been through this. They, too, at one point thought that it was not going to happen, and then it happened. And so raising awareness to these problems is very important. We should be empathetic to those issues, especially in the instance that it happens to us, and hopefully be proactive as well. So I appreciate coming on, talking about this, and to everyone listening, heed the advice. Thanks, George.
Thank you.